if I want to set a style that's going to include spaces between paragraphs, indents, leading, what kind of style do I want to create? A paragraph or a character?
Paragraph.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead right here, and I'm going to go ahead and say new paragraph style. I'm going to call it body, and I want it to be, generally body copy is 10 to 12 point. We're going to make it times, regular. We're going to go, okay. Now, that's super basic, but let's go ahead and just start there with times. And if I do, you can see that already by making it 10 point times, I've just fit that whole article onto that page. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And I'm going to go ahead and do that just to make sure it's applied to the whole thing. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to adjust this a little bit more. You'll notice that I'm going to be like hyper vigilant here and click off it completely. I don't want to be selected if I'm going to edit this. I'm going to go ahead in here. I'm going to go into my basic character formats, which is 10 point. So let's make it 11. And let's make it also, let's make space before each paragraph. You can notice, do you notice kind of on the left where it's adjusting it? So even though I don't have a space here, I'm starting to have a space between my paragraphs. And if you wanted to have a first line indent, which is sometimes very standard, not a requirement, but sometimes very standard, I could go ahead and do that. And then I'd only need to come back in here really and remove the extra formatting from what I cut and pasted from the internet. Like view images would get deleted. And this is actually a whole photo caption. All right, so you kind of get the basic gist there, yes? Okay. Questions just based on that stuff while I get rid of these? Anything? Yeah.
Like you said, it looks like it's for somehow get the text that we find into Word. We can do that by copying and pasting, or does it matter if we copy and paste or just place them into Word? And then does it matter how we get them into there?
So you can cut and paste it into Word or into here. That doesn't matter. And if you put it into Word, then you can just place the Word document into a text box.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one thing that I might find very prohibitive in this case is that as I change this first paragraph that I want to fit in here, that may become something of an issue that I need to be aware of. But for now, I'm going to leave it like that. And I'm going to also go ahead and say, I'm going to make this a little bit wider. And I can even insert, if I switch to my text tool here, whoops, I should be able to insert, there we go, a text box in between and flow that type. So if I go, oh, I don't know if this is all going to fit with my images, let's go ahead and put another text box here. So even though Sky has this great idea to only put part of her text on there, she maybe finds out that she needs to put a little bit more than that. So let's talk about what would be an appropriate amount of text, right? So this is a problem, right? Not necessarily a widow or orphan, but just a loner kind of line, just doesn't look good and makes things difficult to read. So you can adjust your text box to account for that. You can also flow your text boxes separately, which in some cases in a place like this can be really helpful. What do I mean? Let's go ahead and just slide this over so I can see my ruler. And let's go ahead and use the text box created here, but pull ourselves our own set of guides. So if this is becoming sort of weird, I can take my text box and move it back to one text box. and actually draw two separate. So instead of, a lot of you get into that habit, it's totally a common habit. I see people do it all the time, of just hitting a bunch of returns. It seems like an easy solution, but it becomes a really difficult and annoying thing to deal with down the road. By just flowing your text into these two separate boxes, I can then adjust how much or how little of my paragraphs I'm seeing here. All right, so just a different way of thinking about the paragraph flow. All right, so another thing that you might think about or want to play around with would be laying in your words and how you, or your images and how you want to run your words around them. So I created this little really poorly clipping masked sign. That's one of my absolute favorite signs where we go on vacation to illustrate this with. So I'm doing my story about the coast of Maine, and I want to have this sign included as part of the story. And so I'm going to go ahead here, and I'm going to bring this over to about here, and then I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a bit. Now, this particular item, I would like for that to live on my images layer, so I can just drag it down there. Nope, I dragged the wrong thing. And it keeps bringing the wrong one. All right, we'll do it the old-fashioned way. We'll paste it in the same place and put it on there. So this way I can lock my image until I want to monkey with it again. That's where having that is really helpful. And then I'm going to go on to my text layer, because that is where my type should be living. And yep, there we go. And I'm going to go ahead on this layer, and I'm going to just create a shape with my pen tool, and I'm going to create a shape that has no fill and no stroke. So it's basically just going to be a guide. And the way that I want this to work is that on this side of the sign, I would like it to have the shape of the sign that it works around. So I'm going to go ahead and do one of these. And then from here down, I actually want it just to take on, I actually probably even want the top to be pretty straight in this case. So I'm going to make it so that this stroke here is none. And then I'm going to grab this. So this is the shape that I just drew, and the text box that goes with it. And I'm going to go ahead here, and I still constantly get confused between Illustrator and InDesign, but there's actually a text wrap under Window here. And I always go looking for it in the wrong spot, but I usually find it one way or the other. So there's different options. You can have no text wrap. That means you get rid of it. You can have a text wrap that's around the bounding box, which I'll show you in a minute. You can wrap around the object shape, which is exactly what I want to do here. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap around that object shape. And you'll notice that in wrapping around that object shape, I now have created a wrap for my information around that object. Now, as I look to this side of it, however, that is not acceptable for what I'm trying to do. And so I would want, God bless you, to pull that out a little bit further on that side so that I get a nice clean break. I'm going to add some other images in here afterwards. All right. So there's my text wrap. There's one way of handling it. Now, another place that I might use a text wrap where it could be helpful. So if you've done the Linda exercise, you probably may have already learned about how you can set a drop cap. Oh, I cringe to even do it because I really hate it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So they will show you something kind of like this. Let's see. So I can make a drop cap that is 3 lines. And it will do it decent, but it'll do it everywhere that I've applied that. Okay? So that may be a solution that you want to have. But in this case, or for me in general, I just don't like, I don't know, call me a rebel, call me whatever, call me a type snob, whatever you want to call me, go for it. But I like to have total control over my drop cap. So if I'm going to do a drop cap and it's going to be a letter F, I'm going to have a clear plan for what that looks like. So let's go ahead and paste this F in here. And let's find a really beautiful, hopefully, version of it. And let's make it the size that we want it to be. And quite honestly, once I figure out what that letter is going to be, I can really also just make that an object, right? I can create outlines and I can make this thing, this little F. Oh, I don't want it. No, it doesn't. I don't know. There we go. I don't know why I did that. I must have clicked a button at the same time. So if I do something like this, I just feel like I have more control to do exactly what I want to do with it. And so I can put this in here, and I could either tell the type to push off in a square type pattern. And the nice thing about this is then I can decrease or increase the relationships. Now I can do them all together, or I can break the link so that on the right hand side of the object, I push my type a little bit further away, and on the bottom, I actually shrink it a little bit closer. It just gives me the ability to sort of micro adjust the way that those things happen. I also wouldn't probably remove my indent on the whole thing, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that in my style sheet, but I wanted to show you how to do that. Indents and spacing, so we can just go ahead and say no indent. And that would kind of roll it off. Now, that was a bounding box. And remember, the other thing that we learned the other day was to wind it around a shape, which doesn't work really well with what we've done here. So we could use that same strategy that we used before. Again, creating a box on the sides where you don't want anything to happen, and then creating the softness of the form that you want on the sides that you do, and then making sure that you have no stroke and no fill. And then grabbing that object and that type and telling it to wrap around will allow you to have a little bit more flexibility there. And again, when I turn off my guides, or when I go to my preview, my overprint preview, I can actually see what this is going to look like as I flow that type around it. All right. So a couple of general rules for you to be aware of. Number one, on average, a paragraph in an article, a magazine article, should have roughly 5 words on it. This doesn't mean that they never have 4. It doesn't mean that they never have 7, but 5 is kind of the average, right? So as you come through and you look at the way that your information is flowing, you know, you want to be aware of how that works. If your typeface is smaller, like in this case, 10 or 11 point, that's on the smaller side of where I would want to be. It can make it more readable you can make it more readable by simply adjusting your leading, right? So I can come in here, and 11 on 13 is pretty common, but if I make it 11 on 14, just that bit of white space around the words can really help. You can also, through your style sheet, turn on and off hyphenation, right? So if we come into here, right now it's saying that it should hyphenate words with at least 5 letters in them after the first 2 letters, or I could just say don't hyphenate anything because it's just a pain in the butt. That's fine too. But you can fine tune it for that. Now, once I get rid of hyphenation, one of the things that I will find is that I may have some weird little widows and orphans that occur, right? So instead of micromanaging the entire block of copy in that case, here's something you can try. Take just the paragraph that's problematic and think about how you can use your tracking to go ahead and decrease or increase. So -10 would be the default. What if I made it -4? Would it still solve my problem? Not quite. What if I made it -6? Would it solve my problem? Yes. So it's going to almost look exactly the same, only not have that ugly little dangling word. It's really that easy. It gets easy to forget to do it. But look how much better it looks, right? So I do expect that within your copy, my goal in life is to produce designers who will never make it difficult for people to read things ever again. Right? We've all been there. You like finish the sentence, but it's really not finished, and then you have to switch back to the page. Like bad typesetting. I'm learning with kids that children's chapter books are some of the worst typesetting imaginable, which is so irresponsible. Like I want to start like a campaign, an awareness campaign. Yeah, totally. It's ridiculous. Like we're trying to teach kids to read and we do a horrible time of setting their books. It's just bad. All right. So I won't get off on that tangent. But so same thing here. I'm just going to go in. I'm going to look at my tracking. I like to start with the default. So just go 10 up or 10 down and then ask myself, and you start to get kind of a feel for it. Would it still work if I set it just to -6? And yeah, it works lovely. And it works really well, and I can hardly tell a difference. Now, if I set it too much, right? Let's say I can also go in the other direction. So I can make this 20, and it starts to look a little stretched compared to everything else, but not terrible. Mildly obnoxious and looks like it's a different thing than the article. You with me? Now, what you should notice happening is that you will get a plus that will happen when you adjust this here. Let's go in here and let's go with what we did for the other one. So -6. Nope, not going to work. -10. It will have to be. But when you adjust just slight amounts, you should find that when you click on this that you don't get any change and that you can adjust other things throughout the article. So in this case here, where I've got this bit of type coming all the way over here, I might make an executive decision, like I really dislike that. And so I might hit a shift return and in that case bring it or do a flow through. Again, you have to kind of own what you're working on and how you're working on it and make it work for you. Because if I were to just make this smaller or tighter, I still am going to get that weird and wacky little word. And if I were to make it bigger, I would still only get 2 lines there. So none of that is really going to be an acceptable way of working. Now, another option would be, let's go back into this little bit down here. And let's lock up this. Actually, I could also just adjust this slightly and use my shape. Now you'll notice because that sign needs to go off the edge of the page, I do have it going off into the bleed area, and that is required that I would need it to go into that bleed area. So I've got that there. Now, when you're bringing images into your page, so if I'm bringing something in here that I want to be the top of my page, if it's breaking the edge of the page, I do have to add that additional space. So let's say, for example, that I want to have a picture like Sky was talking about. Let's go in my original images. Let's find something kind of horizontal that we can use. what did I end up using on the cover? Let's use this one. Okay, so I've got this here, and I want it to be a width of 7.625. However, I need it to hang off by 1/4 of an inch. I don't need it to cross into the other page, so I only need to add that 1/4 of an inch to it. So 6, 7, 8. So I should be able to do it at about 7.9. The height I'm not going to worry too much about. My resolution should be 100. If it looks bad in Photoshop, it's not getting any better.